All right. Now for the recording, Haniel, again, welcome to Maple Power 2020. Really appreciate you being here. Take it away. Haniel is going to present on RPA, Windows Automation. So it's going to be a great session. Stay tuned, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let me share my screen. So as Victor was saying, I'm going to talk to you today about a product called Winautomation, which is part of the Power Platform solution. Let's just dive right into it. So my name is Haniel Croitoru. I'm a four-time Microsoft MVP. I've been working in the space for about 20 years now. I started working when I was 5 years old, so you can guess my age there. Today I work for Croitoru. It's an international consulting firm. I've been speaking for a number of years now. Recently authored a book on doing agile Office 365. So if you're in the project management space, got three beautiful little daughters. One of them who already presented with me at one of the conferences last year, which was super cool. I do a lot of blogging. If you ever want to follow me on Twitter with the hashtag #flow in60seconds or on LinkedIn. Also, my contact information, you can see it on the screen. Please feel free to reach out. Let's continue this conversation after the session today. So Canada, this is it's a jumbo size event. And if some of you don't know the word jumbo, what it means or where it came from, let me tell you. Jumbo was actually an African elephant that made it through Europe to Canada. And it was in a place called St. Thomas, where unfortunately it died because it was hit by a train. I'm not going to get into the details right now, but to immortalize this elephant, the province of Ontario has actually gone as far as reorganizing and positioning itself to have the elephant embedded forever in its geography. Cool, right? Anyways, enough about elephants. Let's talk about automation. So two different areas I'm going to talk about today. First, I want to give you a bit of an overview of RPA, robotic process automation. Why is it? Why do we care? And then I'm going to jump in, tell you a little bit about Winautomation, and let's actually go ahead and build something from start to finish. So, automate stuff. So we have some really good session. Eric talked about AI. We had some other speakers. There's going to be lots more coming after me. But what's all this hype about Power Platform and automation? Well, let me give you a few reasons. One of them is saving time. If anybody does anything manual and you do the same task over and over, you're not being efficient. So there's two reasons to introduce automation. Either you're smart, or B, you're like me, you're lazy. You don't want to do the same thing over and over. So saving time. Reduce waste. It is 2020. We are still printing out vacation requests or other types of forms that have to be filled in by hand, have to then be scanned in and emailed and printed and then put back into a system just so that you can throw out all that paper on the way. For those of us who love nature, it's a real pain, it's a real waste. Reducing risk. We are humans, we make errors. Well, except for Eric and Victor. We all make errors. So if you want to try to reduce the risk, computers are better at performing the same task in a predictable manner. If you try to do something, even think about emailing a document. If you know the same person, I know Victor Dundas, I trust him with my life. There's some other Victors I don't trust as much. If I send some sensitive information to the wrong Victor, I could potentially have a lawsuit in my hand. So the risk reduction is a really important factor when it comes to automation. Growing your business. So remember I said about saving time. So those individuals who now don't have to do those mundane tasks, they can actually help grow the business by performing revenue-generating tasks and doing things that are going to help their own personal growth. And then the last reason is when there is no other choice. So suppose you want to have your user perform some task and work with some data, but they don't actually have access to the system behind the scene. So what do? Well, you can use automation to provide that specific data to the user, which they can then work on. So just a few reasons to think about why even automate. Now, Power Platform, you heard about it already this morning. You're going to hear about it lots more during the day, so I'm not going to repeat what has already been told many times. The one thing I will say about the Power Platform is that UI Flow falls under Power Automate. It is part of the workflow engine that you can use to automate your processes. What is RPA? So there's often misnomers or different terms being thrown in the field. Some people think that Power Automate is in fact RPA. But really, there is a slightly different meaning behind what RPA is versus what regular or traditional automation is. So when we do RPA, we are essentially trying to learn and to reproduce the manual tasks that the user would perform using a keyboard and using a mouse. And this is a task that you may ask yourself, well, why do we need that? We can use Power Automate. We can use all these wonderful connectors. Well, there's some cases where you might be working with a legacy system like a green screen, a mainframe, or even some desktop applications that have been built that do not have an API. So what do? You just say, okay, we're not going to automate? No. What you want to say is, okay, let's automate, let's use RPA. And that's basically the reason for it. And so when would you use the RPA? When you have tasks that are repeatable, right? If it's a one-time, you're not going to build an RPA process for it. But if it's tasks you have to perform over and over, think about type of batch jobs or something that has to be done on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. If there's certain rules that have to be applied, so you take data, you need to apply some rules, and then you have to do something with them. If there's minimal complexity, so think about Power Automate. It's got all this logic and conditionals and processing you can do. With RPA, it's got to be a little bit simpler. It's more about read the data and then use Power Automate to process it later on. So really the idea behind the RPA is try to minimize the amount of complexity. It's highly regulated. In other words, it's a very repeatable process. And it's high volume. So again, think about month end or year end where there will be a lot of operations. If a user would have to do it with a keyboard and mouse, it's going to be really, really tedious. So those are some of the key drivers for when you want to use RPA. All right. So UI Flow I already mentioned is the answer to Microsoft's answer to RPA. You might have heard about some other products on the market like UiPath or Blue Prism or other ones. Nintex has their own solution. So Microsoft has built out what's called the UI Flow. It was released in 2019. And earlier this year, they bought a company called Softomotive, which has a product called Winautomation. And that is what I'm going to demo today on how to build automation using this tool to meet your specific business needs. All right. And so the first thing you have to consider with Winautomation is there's a few prerequisites. One of them is you need to install, it's a desktop client, you need to install it on your machine to start using it. You also need to install the Power Automate on-premise gateway, because when you're running a desktop application and Power Automate is in the cloud, you need to connect it to, and you do that using the gateway. There's also another piece of a small plugin that has to be installed on your browser, which I forgot to mention here, but those are the key things. And then licensing. So I know there's always a question, what kind of license do you need? So very briefly, there's two versions of the licensing you need. You can get what is called an Attendant RPA, which means that imagine that there's an active session in Windows and the RPA is using your session. And then there's Unattended, which runs behind the scene. Depending on what you need, you will either be paying $40 per month for a specific RPA bot, or you'll be paying $150 a month for an unattended bot. And again, that's really high level. Licensing can get really, really complex. I don't want to take up any more time. If you want to discuss it further, again, let's discuss it afterwards. Okay, enough slides, enough about talking. Let's do some demos. Let's build some stuff. So let me start by sharing the client. So this is Winautomation console. You install it, you authenticate to your tenant, and now you can start to actually build your Winautomation bots. So what I want to do today is I want to show you a simple example where I want to know how many MVPs there are in any given country, and I want to collect that information because I want to run some stats. So there's a website, mvp.microsoft.com, which is right here. And you can see that I can search by country. If I say right here, let's say I'm going to go Israel, and I'm going to say search, it's going to come back. It's going to tell me there's 10 MVPs in Israel. Okay, that's awesome. So I'm going to now go ahead and build a bot that will automatically search for a specific country, find out the number of results, return that, and then store that for me in SharePoint. Good? Awesome. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to create a new process, and I'm going to call this one Maple Power 2020. and I'm going to do my process designer. Okay, so I'm going to start with a blank canvas. On the left-hand side, this is where you have all the possible actions that are available to you. There's a lot of logic to it, so you can start typing in the name of an action, and it's going to pre-filter the list for you. You have your main canvas, which shows you all of the tasks that you have built. In the bottom, you can see some feedbacks around errors, or if you're capturing certain regions on a screen. And then some additional information on the right, bottom right around variables, and the top right, the functions that you're using. So I'm going to start by launching a browser. So I'm going to type launch, and I'm going to use my Edge browser. And it's going to say, what's the URL? So I'm actually going to go to my URL here. And I'm going to not take the country. I'm going to leave that out. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to try to run it. Look, I've built a bot. First step, it runs. Great. Now, let's start to abstract some information and see how we can actually get to the bottom of it. So I want to get this little number here. So what I'm going to do here is I know that I want to get an element from my browser. So get an element from the web page. And it's going to say from the browser, which element do I want to get? And I'm going to say, I'm going to store it in a variable. This is going to be num MVPs. That's going to be the variable. But what's the element? So I'm going to use this control here to say add a control. And it's going to go back to my window. And you can see as I move my mouse around, you can see how it's identifying all the different HTML controls on the page. So I'm going to put my mouse right on the number. I'm going to hit Control and the mouse key. And now you can see that it actually captured the tag. I'm going to hit OK. And you can see right here, I've got num MVPs and there's a text value. So let me try to, I'm going to close the browser, so I'm not going to have too many. I'm going to run it again, and let's see what happens. OK, so you can see it captured the num MVPs in my variable. Good. So one thing I'm going to do now is, so I'm not going to have too many open windows. I'm going to do a close browser right after that. And it's going to close the browser that I have. So right now, my bot does some very simple task. It goes to the web page, gets that number, and stores it in here. Now, I have brackets in here. I don't want the brackets because I want to have a number. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to define a variable. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to not give it a value, but I'm going to call it empty. And the reason is, when I do a replace, I'm going to search for these brackets, and I'm going to replace them with something. I have to replace them with something. That's what Winautomation wants. So I have to replace it with, I'm going to give it the variable of empty. So text, I'm going to go put that right here. And I'm going to say the text that I want to parse is my num MVPs. This is my variable that I'm reading from. I want to find the bracket, the opening bracket. I want to replace it with %empty. It's my empty string, and I'm going to put it right back into the same variable. So that's effectively going to get rid of my opening bracket. I'm going to take the same operation, and I'm going to copy it again, except this time I'm going to remove my closing bracket. All right, let's test it out. So I'm going to run through it. And as you can see, it removed my brackets, and it left it as the number 10. All right, let me try something else. I'm going to go into my browser, and instead of Israel, I'm going to type Wakanda, because I'm sure in Wakanda there's a lot of MVPs, a lot of smart people. Let's see what happens. Oh, there is no MVP in Wakanda. Okay, and the window didn't close. Let's see why it didn't close. Aha, I have an error. What's the error? Failed to retrieve the attribute. Okay, So in other words, what it's saying is it's looking for a certain element, which is the number, the results found. It couldn't find it because Wakanda, there are no MVPs. So what I can now do is put a condition. I'm going to do if. Where is it? If file exists, where's my, if web page contains, and I'm going to put that right here before that. So what I'm going to do in this if condition is I'm going to say if a web page contains a certain element, and what's the element that I want? I want the same element that I searched for before, the results. I'm going to add that in here. So if they exist, then I want to extract the number and I want to replace the variables and do all that fun stuff. All right, so let's try that again now. Going to run through. The window closed. You can see how num MVPs is blank. Okay. Now I want it to be a number, so let me declare the variable right from the beginning. So I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to declare 0, and this one's going to be num MVPs. Okay, so now if I run it, it's actually smart enough to say, oh, this is a numerical value. It's not a string anymore. And if I didn't find a country or if I didn't find anything on the page, it leaves it at 0, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want. So now I'm going to change it. Actually, instead of doing this Wakanda here, I'm going to do something else because I keep changing it inside of my string. Ultimately, I want to have this, the country to be a parameter. So I'm going to add another variable. And I'm going to call this one, let's do here, Canada. And I'm going to do country is my variable. And then in my browser, I'm going to replace Wakanda with %. Anytime you see something %, that's a variable. So now I'm going to be searching all of my MVPs in Canada. So let's see. Okay, it didn't take the, let's see, country is Canada. Let's see what didn't like that. Thinks that this whole thing is a string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this URL. I'm going to call this MVP URL. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to put this here. And this is MVP URL. See how there's a red mark here? It says that there's something wrong. So if I go in here, it tells me that the URL does not exist, or the variable Canada does not exist, right? So I'm going to do country and put the URL back. That should work. Okay, so I actually don't need this. Try to run it. And it's looking for, okay, let's see what's going on here. Okay, still doesn't like the string. All right. So let me try that one more time. URL. We actually probably should do is save this, okay, and run it. All right. So you can see right now it's finding my, oh, it closed down. One thing actually I forgot to mention is when you're running these bots, you can't really interact with the page. So I'm gonna disable this action. I'm gonna run it again, just so we can see what is happening. Hey Eric, how you doing? But you can see right now it's finding it based on my parameter, which is the country, and it's storing it in my variable, which is 134. Perfect. So right now my Winautomation bot is doing exactly what I needed to do. It is going to a web page, taking in the country as a parameter, and returning the number of MVPs in that country. But this bot right now is independent of Power Automate. It doesn't do anything there. So how do we connect the two pieces together? Well, there's a couple more things we need to do. So the first one is we need to be able to pass a variable into the flow as opposed to just hard coding or having a parameter in here. So I'm going to do command get command line argument. Where is it? I'm going to put that right here. And this is going to be my country. OK, and what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to disable the other one, so it's not going to override it. I'm not deleting it, I'm just disabling it. I'm going to save that. OK, if I were to run it now, it's going to complain because it's not going to find anything from the command line. So it's going to give you essentially empty because the command line hasn't passed anything. So now is what we have to switch over to Power Automate. So I'm going to switch my windows. And I'm going to go to Power Automate. I already have a flow, but I'm going to quickly build one from scratch just to show you the speed in which we can do this. So I'm going to create a new one. Maple Power 2020 request. I'm going to create one. The first thing I'm going to do is I have a SharePoint list right here with a number of countries. And for each one of the countries, I want to get the number of MVPs. So I'm going to say get items. I'm going to get my items from SharePoint. Let me make this a bit bigger so you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go to my RPA site, select my list. And then what I want to do is there's a UI flow action. There's actually 3 of them. So the one you need to use for Winautomation is the third one. When you create it, the first thing it's going to ask you is which one is your on-prem gateway, and you need to have one. So I'm going to select the one that I have. And then it's going to ask me, actually, no, sorry, this is the which flow. I'm going to create a new UI flow. Maple Power 2020. So I'm going to give this one country, add a description, country to search. And I'm going to go next. Winautomation. This is the action I want to run. What is the process? This is where I need to give it exactly the name of the process that I want. So the name of the process is Maple Power 2020. So okay, and then my parameter is going to be the country. And I'm going to save that. Okay. And I'm going to go next. No outputs, that's okay. I'm going to test. I'm going to say Canada. It's not finding the extension, that's okay. Save and exit. So the extension is basically the browser that you're using with. So I'm using Edge for my automation. I'm not using my Chrome browser because there's some conflicts I have with other connections or extensions. So that's what I'm using. And then I can choose if I want to do attended or unattended. So I'm going to do attended. And then the country that I want to use is going to be the title for my SharePoint list. I'm going to save that. Okay. And now it's giving me a warning about filtering my SharePoint list, which is totally fine. I don't care about that. So I'm going to save that, and now I'm going to give it a test. Okay, so it's authenticating, and I'm going to say go. And it's going to run the flow. So now we sit back. I'm not going to touch the keyboard. I'm not going to touch the mouse, because what's going to happen if I do that, it's going to give me error messages. I'm actually interfering with the flow. And this is what attended means, is that when you run attended, you cannot interact with the mouse and the keyboard. You're breaking things. So I'm just going to sit back right now, like a good boy, and let it do its thing. And as you can see, It's going in one by one, opening the browser, and searching for the users. So I'm going to give it another minute to finish. And there's typically a small delay between each execution, because what it needs to do is every time you want to run the flow, it has to essentially run the UI flow, reach out to the on-prem gateway, wake up the Winautomation process, run the Winautomation process, and then return back to the flow. So this is the last one, Brazil. This is for you, Victor. Okay, so now it's done. The flow should have finished in a moment, and we should see a green check mark to say that everything is good. Should be there momentarily. There we go. Awesome. So now if I go to my SharePoint list, everything is going to be nicely populated. Wrong. Okay. So there's one thing that's missing. If you look back at my workflow, if I go back to right here, and what you can see, there's one step that's missing, and a really important step. I'm capturing the data, but I'm never sending it back to my flow or to anything else. And so today, when you're working with Winautomation, there's no, it's meant to be run as a command line. And when you're actually looking at the way that it's being executed, it's like a command line. The idea is that you're sitting at a desktop and you're running this Winautomation process. It's not really meant to be on the web. And so what happens is you can't directly pass back a value to your flow. Doesn't do it right now. So the way that you do that is you actually have to make another call to another flow, which is we're going to then receive the data and do something with it. So here's an example. And actually, one thing I should do before I do that is re-enable my action so that I'm not going to get a million different windows. So let me just quickly close this down. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and I'm going to look for my web service, Invoke Web Service. And what the web service needs is it needs to know what you're posting or what kind of an action you want to do, and then pass that information. So in this case, because we're dealing with Power Automate, we know we need to change it to JSON in terms of the accept and the content type. Also, in the advanced section, there's an encoding the request. You want to disable the encoding. You want to send just straight text through. And now I'm going to be passing back two pieces of information. One of them is going to be the country, which is going to be %country. And then the num MVPs, which is going to be the %num MVPs. And I'm going to close that. So this is the JSON body. This is basically a way to pass information back and forth. That's it for this action right now. It's not complete. There's an error because it needs to know what URL to go to. That URL is going to be that flow that I'm about to create that is now receiving the information. So I'm going to go back to flow, and I'm going to create a new flow. So this is going to be an automated flow this time. And request. Here's my request trigger. Never shows up when I need it, so let me cancel out of here. So automate it. So I'm going to do a request. Now, I'm going to pass it the same structure. So right here, I have a string and then I have a number. Let's make this number just a 1. And this is going to be quotes. So now it's going to expect a string, which is the country, and it's going to expect an integer, which is a number. In this flow, let's call this update my MVPs. And I'm going to say get items. going to go back to the same SharePoint list I had before. And I'm going to give it a condition where filter title equals country. Actually, I'm going to do one small thing here. I'm not just going to do the country. I need to do something called a trim because sometimes it adds a blank space and that throws off the search. So do trim, trigger body. All right. And then once I have that, it's going to return, I'm going to top count 1, which means I should only have 1 per country. And then I'm going to do update item. Going to go back to the same SharePoint list. MVP by country. The ID is going to be the ID of the item I'm getting now. Because it's get items gets a whole list of items, this is not going to create a loop for me. But that's okay. I know the loop is only going to run once. The country is going to be my country that I've had. And then the MVPs is going to be the num MVPs that I'm returning from my action here. That's basically the whole workflow. It receives a country and a number, find that item in my SharePoint list, go and do the update. Now that I've saved this whole workflow, it generates for me a URL, and this is a key piece. I'm going to take a copy of that. I need to decode it. In other words, wherever I have the percentages, it has to decode it. I'm going to take that string. I'm going to go back to my workflow now. Where did you go? There we go. So I'm going to put in this whole URL without the HTTPS. I'm going to make it that. And I'm going to make it a post. And that should be it. So now what I'm basically doing is I'm getting information from the flow. Flow is passing me the country. I'm processing it, getting it from the web page, and then I'm making a call to another flow to basically store the information back in SharePoint. Let's see if this is going to work. You never know when it's a demo. So I'm going to go back to my flows. I'm going to go back to my first flow, and I'm going to run it. And I'm just going to sit here and see what happens if it updates the actual countries. Okay, so it found 134. Okay, it sometimes switches to the last window it remembers, so that's not a problem, but let's just wait, let it finish for a second. Maybe I'll take one question if there's anything that's been posted, Victor, while this is processing.
So we got a question around if this particular setup still needs Selenium.
No, this is replacing Selenium. So there's Selenium, and then there's the old desktop version. This is essentially replacing both of them.
Perfect.
I believe you can still use Selenium, but you're better off using this. This is a lot more powerful.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the only one I've got.
So let's see if this worked. Oh, no, it's still going. Almost forgot about this. Okay, so I did something wrong here. Okay, so now the fun begins. I'd have to actually decode and figure out exactly why it didn't work. But I'm just clicking. Oh, I think I know why. Forgot to put brackets around the country. And I believe if I go to my flow, I would find that it errored out. Oh, it never even ran. Okay. So let's see. We create these variables, it's easier to manage them as opposed to typing it in directly. So, well, okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just to quickly test it. I'm going to disable the command line. I'm going to re-enable my Canada. That's a way that you can quickly test the workflow. Rather than having to call one flow to process everything, I'm just going to do Canada, run through it, and see what it does. So I know it's getting the information, it's collecting it, it's making a call to the service, and it's returning a 202, which means it was successful. So if I go to my SharePoint list, I should be 134. Perfect. So that was my problem. So now if I disable the country, so if I just, enable it and disable my other variable, and if I save it, and if I go back to my workflow now and run the main one, just to make sure that it's, yeah, okay. So I'm going to run it. What's this? And go here. Loves popping up the Winautomation window. I'll take another question. No questions. Wow. You guys are all ready to start building these workflows?
There were questions from Orly, but Pamela Baxter replied to her.
Okay. Yeah. So what you're seeing is literally building a process. Now, granted, it is a simplistic process we are showing here, but the idea behind it is that you can build these fairly quickly. And not a word of a lie, I built this whole thing last night. Haven't unfortunately had too much time to play with Winautomation. The learning curve is not big. If you are comfortable, if you understand the process of how Power Automate works, and you understand the concepts, and you've worked with other SharePoint workflows in the past, or Nintex or some of these other tools, which are very visual in nature, you're really composing these complex processes with these building blocks where all you have to do is pass a few parameters, and you're essentially building this whole solution. So if I go back to SharePoint, here you go. So now this was quick. This was for 4 countries. Imagine you want to do 100 or so countries and having to do this manually, and there's no API. You'd have to be doing all this manual copying back and forth. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the demo is about. So it actually took less time than I was expecting. I'm going to open it up to more questions right now.
All right, I got a question myself, and it's a similar question I asked Eric. If folks want to get started on this, what is the best path?
So a couple of things. As I said before, with the prerequisites, what you'll need to do is, first of all, obviously you have to have a tenant that is active. You should go to the flow page, and you should look at the automation piece. There are links to download Winautomation. There are links to download the gateway. Those are the first things you need to do. There's also actually the links right here provided, and I can share the presentation with you so you can get them. In terms of license, you can get a trial license, so don't worry about having to buy license right off the get-go. Once you've done all that and you've configured your gateway and you're able to run everything together, you can actually start, when you install Winautomation, it gives you examples. That's the beauty of it. You can actually start building these kind of automations, and it gives you examples of interacting with SQL and with Excel and other types of data, different types of logic operations. You can really start building your skills from the ground up. That's the beauty of it. The two pieces that are sometimes a little bit finicky and people have a hard time with is calling the Winautomation flow from a UI Power Automate, or sorry, from a Power Automate flow, and passing data back. And that's why I really wanted to cover these 2 points in our session today, where you got to remember that you need to, inside of your Winautomation flow, you need to use the get command line arguments to pass variables in, and they can be, I believe, comma separated if you have more than one variable. And if you, and then inside of UI, UI flow, you have to create a UI flow and then give it the exact name. So you have a folder name, Maple Power, and then there is a, let's say here I had Maple Power 2020. It has to be exactly that, Maple Power / Maple Power 2020. If you make it lowercase or add another space, it's not going to find it. So it's really important that you give exactly the same name that appears here with a / to separate the levels. And once you set that up, again, you can start passing the parameters and start acting on data that you have from Power Automate. And that's the beauty is these Winautomations now can act on data from all of these 350 plus connectors that you have available in Power Automate. You're really opening yourself up to a lot of flexibility. And then passing back data, again, this is where I was showcasing the example where you need to do an Invoke Web Service, which is I find the easiest way. And you have to just call another flow with a request action to receive the information. If you want to send it somewhere else, not Power Automate, you can have a logic app, you can have another web service, anything essentially that can receive information. So those, I would say, would be the starting points. Get comfortable with just the basics of building a flow. Make sure you learn and understand how to pass data to the Winautomation flow, and then how to retrieve the data if you so desire. The rest is then just building on making these kind of workflows more complex.
This is awesome. As far as I shared your social links again here on the chat. But as far as like videos and training, is there a particular area that you suggest?
I would say if you look online, Microsoft has some good training. If you look at Reza Durrani, he's been putting out a lot of videos. Also, I'm trying to think who else.
Maybe Daniel
Laskowitz. Yeah, Daniel. I was just thinking Daniel Laskowitz from the Netherlands. He's been doing some videos. So there's no shortage of information online that you can find. I would say that's a good starting point. And actually, Daniel put together 2 or 3 different videos that talk exactly about how do you pass information back from Winautomation to Power Automate. How do you call a or how do you call a Winautomation workflow from your UI flow? So there's some good videos out there that you can also use to kind of get going with the process. Yeah.
Very good, very good. We have about 17 minutes on the clock still. I'll leave the chat open. I'll be online with video as well. Folks who are with us, if you have questions around this session or even the sessions before, and you want to place those questions now, or general questions around community events, or anything else essentially that you want to talk about, we have the time before Scott Duro's session coming up on the top of the hour. There is a question here: when invoking a web service, does the payload has to be JSON only, or does it support other payload like XML?
So if you see right here, because I'm sending it back to Power Automate, which speaks JSON, I have to change this onto JSON. But you have other options. You can do XML, JavaScript. You can do plain text, HTML. So there's different forms that you can pass back. Yeah. And you also have options on the type of an operation that you're performing, whether it's a post, a get, a delete. So the essentially full flexibility in terms of the web service call you're making.
This is awesome. Yeah, that's very flexible. I got someone asking you, Haniel, to show the why slide.
The which? Sorry.
Why?
Oh, the why.
Yeah.
Let me go back here. What is automation? All right. This is usually the first question when people talk about automation. Why bother? And what I find is we as a community working in the Power Platform, we are very well positioned in terms of answering the question, because it's a very simple ROI conversation. If somebody performs a task manual, think about how much time it takes them. Think about how much you're paying them salary. Now think about a computer doing it in fractions of seconds, doing it repeatable, no errors, and that individual can then focus on something else. So if you're ever looking to justify investing in automation, and I know that with Victor, you were talking to Eric before about licensing for AI. If you start looking at this kind of ROI discussion, it's a really, really simple discussion typically. So yes, there is an upfront cost, and there's also an ongoing cost for performing it. But imagine you're talking about paying $40 a month, or let's say $150 a month for running a bot. Now, if you convert that to year, you're looking at, what is it? $1,500 plus another $300. So you're looking at $1,800 a year to run a bot. That is way less than you'd be paying any person, or in most cases, you'd be paying most jobs to perform a task. Okay, now granted, it's not a full time that it's running, but even if you were to do the math of how long does it take to perform some of these things, right? Think about this one simple example that I gave. If you wanted to run a stat on how many MVPs there are in any territory, and you want to do this, let's say even let's say monthly. I know it's not a very good case because MVPs typically don't change every month, but let's say you wanted to do that. You'd have to go through 100 and something countries. If it takes you even a minute to do that, that's a minute times 100. So you're looking at maybe an hour and a half spent 2 hours to just copy data, forget about the errors, and then calculate how much a person's salary would be invested in doing that kind of a manual task.
No, so, it is indeed a great case. I mean, I find it true. It should be true with almost every product, if not every product in the Power Platform. Mm-hmm. Even if you talk about development tasks that we had to do manually in the past. So I was in a session, I think it was last year, with Dina. Dina is going to present on PVA. So he was making the case. He's an expert on bot framework. So he was making a case around constructing a bot. How much time does it take him to construct a bot if he starts straight using the bot framework, as opposed to starting in PVA, getting his topic set up, and then extending it to the bot framework? How much faster he can get it done. So I find it the same to be true even for developing software. I know that if you design your API, you most likely have more control in making an API, just a systems API, a lot faster than doing it with the Power Platform. But then the time that it consumed to develop all from the ground up, instead of using Dataverse for that matter, instead of using Canvas apps to get something started quickly, it's just beyond comparison. The time and the effort, and therefore money invested.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, because sometimes the discussion, and if I go forward to my slides around RPA, so there's sometimes discussions around, okay, if there's a legacy system, if there's no API, that is when RPA is a good candidate. That is when I would use Winautomation. Would I use Winautomation if I'm trying to connect to another system that has an API, and I maybe in trouble for saying this, but hell no. I find APIs are a lot more consistent, faster, and in most cases provide a lot more flexibility than having to do it through an RPA solution. I personally, that's my personal opinion, I see RPA as a stopgap for legacy systems or for systems that don't yet have an API. Once an API is available, it is a lot easier typically when you start looking at the resources you need to support an RPA solution. Sometimes there's limitations around getting access. So that's just a personal thing that, RPA, I would say, I would not apply RPA in situations where I can use an API that is already there.
That's a good point. The guy who asked you to show the why slide, he now asked to show the when slide. And while you go through that, there's another question on the chat around licensing, not necessarily RPA.
Yeah.
So the question was if the Power Apps per user license plan can access entities that are reserved to or associated to products like the sales, enterprise, and such. I don't think you can use the per use license in that fashion because you must have at least one license of sales or customer service for that matter to be able to run the product. But one thing that I found, this is from Steve Murdew, I think is his last name, is built this particular product. It's called Rapid Start CRM. This one runs on the per user license Power Apps per user license, and it's like a, I don't want to say a Porsman version of Rapid Started CRM, but it gives you quite a bit of functionality within that particular pay grade. So I think the Power Apps per user license is around $10 USD.
Yes.
So you get your CRM, if you will, at a lower cost. So this particular product only uses CDS core licenses and some customizations, of course, but it allows you to use dynamic or well, too many names. Use the CDS or data verge product in a CRM fashion for a low cost. So,
Yeah.
Paul, I hope I have answered your question.
Go for it. In terms of the licensing, so if I go back to my licensing slide, if I can find it again, I had it here somewhere. Just a second. Come on. Here we go. Okay, so you're talking about the per user plan is $50 per month. You're right, but that does not include RPA. So if you want to use RPA, you have to go to the $40 per month for the users who are going to be using RPA. So in other words, if there's one account that is running an RPA process, that account is going to need to be $40 per month if it's an attended RPA process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Any additional questions? All right, I'm going to pause the recording here for a second.